So it took a few seconds just to come up because I felt like I was in the Oscars. I was having costume change just in the background there. And the other thing I'm going to try really quickly is I'm just going to try a different click at the guys at the back have just given me one. So hopefully that makes for a slightly more seamless experience for you guys. So just give me a second. I'm going to try it on yours, E, because I don't want to steal my own thunder. Yeah. So wasn't it fascinating what Eve was saying? The fact that media needs to really start thinking about adding science to our craft. And I think there's so much there to be explored. And so hopefully, when we get to the end of my presentation, and if there's any time for any questions, we can maybe touch on that a little bit as well. And I'll try and give you my perspective on that. I just want to open by saying thank you to Al Jazeera. It's an honor to be here. I think this mix of editorial, technical, suppliers in the same room, in the same space, talking about the challenges that media faces and talking about what we need to do to serve our audiences is so important. And talking about values and the value that our businesses need to create and the values that we all ascribe to, I think, was the topic that Al Jazeera really asked me to explore. So when I was talking to Yassine and the team, they were saying, this is what we want you to cover, but it felt like I needed to break my presentation down into two halves. Because if you're going to talk about values and building business value, you have to demonstrate what skin in the game you have. What are you actually doing? So in the first half, I'm going to really talk about what is the BBC actually doing when it comes to AI. Give you some demonstrations, some examples. I'll show you some videos of services that we've already developed. And then we're going to pivot, and we're going to have a conversation about, okay, well, what does that actually mean? There's a broader conversation going on around AI. It's not just affecting media, it's affecting all industries. So what does that actually matter? Why does that matter? And why is it really important for the media to take a leading role in this? But let's start with this. AI is one of the most important things humanity is working on. It is more profound than, I don't know, electricity or fire. Now, you've all had breakfast, you're all energized, you're all probably reading that and thinking, okay, you're making your own judgment. So what I want you to do is, if you think that's ridiculous and the person who said that needs to be kicked out of the room, put your hands up. Because there's some cynical journalists in the room. There's bound to be a few of you who think that's a little bit out there, right? There's a few hands, there's a few hands. How many of you are not quite sure? Could be, but not quite sure. Put your hands up. Okay, a few more hands, a few more hands. How many of you actually agree? Some even more hands, but actually, in total, I think there's a few people who have abstained. They have no opinion, right? So by the end, let's see if we can convince you on that. So when you're thinking about what is it that we as media organizations do, if you boil it right down, I think there's three things. We sort of gather the materials, right? We make our content, we get our creatives together, we send out cameramen, we get a script together, and we gather those raw ingredients. We then sort of package it together, we create and manage it, we figure out what to do with our inventory. We then, if we're smart about this, decide that we want to share it and hopefully people are going to consume it. And if you try and break these three boxes down a little bit and think about what's happening to the modern media supply chain, well, you'll probably recognize this diagram. It's the one that Mark Harrison showed yesterday, Mark from the DPP. Mark and I did this piece of work together where we were looking at, well, what is the modern media supply chain? And it's represented by a whole bunch of services. So infrastructure, management, processing. As you go further up this diagram, as you get closer to the creative teams that you have, the editorial teams, the way that they interact with these services doesn't actually matter that much. That was the first, one of the leading conclusions that came through to us. It's really about the way that experience is delivered to them. And that's going to constantly shift and evolve. The sorts of non-linear editors you might be using today are not like the ones you were using 10 years ago. Or were just not so long ago cutting film with razor blades, and now it's all digital. But through that work, something else became apparent, data. Almost everything that we do, every process that we run, every aspect of our supply chain can be considered as data. Even the content itself, the audio, video, and text, the currency of our business is just another form of data. And if you think about everything that you're working with is data, then you have to consider it as your intellectual property. It has value. The way that you process it, host it, mine it, what you decide to do with it has value. And it spans a range of domains. So it could be data around your content, metadata around your content, data around your talent, rights, compliance. You might have data around what you're doing around your audiences, what they are telling you about your content. But one thing that we probably haven't been at in media is processing data, extracting it from those databases that it's stored in, or those file shares that it's been living in. And a lot of the conversation yesterday was about how the cloud is going to move us on that journey. But that's just one step. Making sense of all of this is where artificial intelligence starts to come in. Now, at this point in the presentation, I'm going to use a visual metaphor. Because data is energy, I think yesterday somebody called it the new oil, we really need to understand not only how we might mine this data, process this data, acquire more data, but also the responsibility that comes with that. The same lessons that we've had in dealing with energy apply to dealing with data. The responsibility that comes with the wider ecosystem that we serve. All of these things become an intrinsic part of the business decision. So when it comes to AI as a possible approach to making sense of all of this data that we're gathering, if this was a presentation that was happening a few years ago, it would have been a big data presentation, right? You would have had a vendor up here trying to tell you a Hadoop service or some of the big data analytics tool set. And now, has the conversation just moved on to AI? Is AI just the new hype? Well, we have to sort of define what we mean by AI. And I think Eve did a fantastic job there, giving us the detailed view of the range of different things that AI can be. And what struck me is that AI is an umbrella term. It spans a spectrum of things. On the one hand, it does span this sort of conversation, the move towards general artificial intelligence, the creation of machine intelligence that's as smart as, if not smarter than humans, and there are lots of people who are working on that. At the other end of the spectrum, it also includes apps that help you choose your next pizza topping, right? So the range of different conversations that are happening around AI is super broad. The conversation I'll be having with you is not about this type of AI. It's more about this type. What does this represent? Well, to break that down, and again, borrowing from Eve, it's really around the applied side of machine learning, the use of lots and lots of maths. Now, I want you to all think back to your high school maths courses and that statistic module, if you did a statistics module. If you don't remember it, go off and dust it off, Google it. All of us should go away and take another high school course in probability and statistics, because if you really want to understand the power of machine learning and AI, that's where you have to start. Because what's really happening today is complex mathematics around probability and statistics is being turned into mathematical representations, models, which are then being turned into software, into code, which are then being wrapped around a product, or product is being created, which is then being used to do a thing. That's what it is. That's what's happening. And amazing things can happen. You can extract meaning from text. You can identify objects in video. You can understand the emotional state of somebody. You can detect patterns. Now, how many people, and I'm interested at the back of the room as well, how many people can spot the lion in this picture? Everyone? How many people can't? Maybe one or two? As humans, we are really good at detecting patterns, visual patterns. But we have our own limits. And up until a few years ago, machines had lots of limits too. It was really difficult to develop machines to be able to detect patterns. If you wanted to train a machine a few years ago to detect that lion, you almost had to tell it, well, there's going to be a lion that looks like this in that picture. You have to code in all of the possible answers for that machine to navigate its way through and figure out, well, that's that particular lion. Current developments, however, have moved the state on. So now machines are almost better than we are at detecting patterns in images, in video, in sound. And we have to remember, content is just another form of data. Machines are really good at detecting patterns in data. And that's one type of application that AI and machine learning can help with in media. With that information, well, how does that help? How does that help your business? What can you do? A lot of the business conversations that happen at the BBC and in industry and in conversations with colleagues in the wider network, all start with, well, isn't AI just a solution looking for a problem? Well, if we're going to talk about problems, then the problems we normally have in businesses are around efficiency. We want to either improve our processes or we want to drive out costs. Productivity, we want to scale beyond what we can currently do. We want to grow our business. Creativity, creativity in the sense that we in media understand it, but also creativity in the sense that there's a problem and there's no clear-cut answer. How can we creatively approach that? But even that framework doesn't really help you move on and understand, well, how can you apply AI? So I'm going to be cheeky now. I'm going to suggest that we redefine what AI actually means. Rather than artificial intelligence, I want you to remember 3 A's. The first one is automate. Really try and understand, is the problem that you're trying to solve one where automation is the answer? Augment. Are you trying to support a staff member, a person who's working for you? Are you trying to augment what they can do? The second one. The third A, amplify. Are you trying to achieve something that you just don't have capacity or skill to do right now? If those are the types of problems that you have, then AI might be the answer. So I said, well, I'll show you some practical examples how we've got skin in the game. Let me take you through how we are starting to apply machine learning in the BBC across our whole supply chain. And it's important to say, as we run through these examples, that these are just 3. Our view is that AI and machine learning is going to impact every aspect of what we do. So the first one is around production. Let's play a video. There's no sound on this. I just want you to watch it for a minute. So this could have been one of the panel sessions we had yesterday. 3 or 4 or 5 people with a number of cameras. In our example, there are 4. I think there was something, Ra was saying there's something like 10 here today, a number of cameras. And there's a comedian, Nish Kumar. I don't know if you know him, but he's a comedian. There's a few comedians. This is a comedy panel show. And the director is cutting between the different shots. A fairly simple type of production, but a typical one, something that we've all seen, maybe we all do. Al Jazeera, I'm sure, have examples. Interviews are done like this. Now, and I'm going to do this from the laptop because clickers have been a little bit flaky. Let's take a look at how we put this together. So this was done by the BBC Research and Development team at a comedy festival called the Edinburgh Comedy Festival. So I'm just going to pause there. Can you still hear me okay? Okay. So like I said, 4 cameras, just zoomed out, a wide shot. And if we play through, in a second, you'll start to see how we're starting to apply machine learning. So if I just pause there, hopefully at the back you can see this, but around the faces, there is a red box and a green outline with an arrow. We are using an algorithm to detect that that is a person and that's the person's head. We're using another algorithm to detect where that person is looking so we can detect where the gaze is going. So we are combining two approaches there already. Let's fast forward a little bit. All of these blue rectangles that you can see, it probably looks like a bit of a mess, but each one of these is lots of rectangles overlaid on each other. These are all of the possible camera shots that can be generated from that one wide original camera image. So one physical camera, locked to wide shot. Within that, these are all of the possible framings of shots that are possible. And again, another algorithm determining that. At the moment, it just looks like chaos, right? A director would know what to do, where to frame the shot. So if we skip forward a little bit more, we started to train this model then, and if you look in the bottom left corner, the red rectangle, to understand, based on editorial decisions, what constitutes a good shot. So that red rectangle is framed as, well, let's get 2 of the panelists into the frame. And if you do that across all of the different cameras, the 4 cameras that we had, you can generate a whole range of different shots. All done automatically. So if you watch this clip again, this is fully generated by algorithms. No human intervention. So not only were the faces detected and where the panelists were looking, not only were the camera shots framed by algorithms, but the directorial cuts were also done by the AI. So in production, we are exploring what it would mean to fully automate a production process and output. Is that because that's what we want to do? Not necessarily, and I'll come back to why exploring a fully automated production is a good research output, but not necessarily what we intend to do in our day-to-day operation. Now let's talk about that middle part of the value chain, where you're creating and managing content. Rawa talked about an example where you needed to find a clip of Donald Trump, and you had to sit through hours just finding that one quote. I promise you, I didn't pay Rawa any money about that example. It was completely by chance. But one of the things that, again, our teams have developed is the ability to look through text, extract quotes, and attribute those quotes to an individual or entity. So the previous slide was, I just used a BBC article, but it could have been any text article. This one was covering a story a couple of days ago about Syria and an aid convoy. And on this one, I just gave it the URL. I could have pasted it in the text itself in the top box. And it's told me, well, there's a whole bunch of quotes. And for example, the BBC's Jeremy Bowen is referring to convoys of trucks and 27,500 people. And in the article itself, there you go. There's the piece where Jeremy spoke. So if you're mining through, physically trying to go through all of this data that you have, as journalists, that takes a huge amount of time. So really what we're trying to develop here is a set of tools that do that second A, that augment our staff base, that give them the tools they need to do their jobs, but do them faster, get to the answer that they need quicker. That's some of the things we're doing. So this service is called Citron. We expose it through an API. You can actually go and try this. And it's just one of a range of different services that are trying to extract meaning from text. The final example I want to give you is around, well, okay, how do we amplify? We want to deliver great experiences for our audiences. We want to really improve our customer experience. What can we do in that space? Hopefully you've all heard of iPlayer. It's the BBC's streaming service. And what we realize is that at the end of programs, you'll know this, end credits roll, right? The directors, the cameraman, the graphics, producers, they all want to make sure that their credits are showing. It's a moment where you really want to reflect everyone who's been involved in the creative process. But it's also true to say that that's a good moment to recommend another program that somebody might be interested in watching. In fact, we know that if we get the timing right, and we recommend another program where the credits roll, engagement goes up from our users by double digits. So it's really valuable to get that timing right. The issue is, well, the BBC gathers its inventory, its programs. Some of it's produced by ourselves. Some of it comes from the ecosystems of producers and production companies who create content for the BBC. They don't always have the metadata that tells you exactly when the credits are going to roll. We don't have a time code provided by that ecosystem that says, in this program, here are when the credits are going to roll. So what can you do? Well, we could try and mandate it. That's one option. We could go back to all of those producers and tell them, add the time code for when the credits roll. But why not use some of the techniques and developments around machine learning to help us with that? So in this instance, let's take a look. So what one of my colleagues did was he took a whole bunch of content that did have credits and another whole bunch of content that had no credits, and he trained a deep neural network to tell the difference. And so here's an example. We've got a clip playing. As the clip gets to its end, what the mathematical model is doing is determining, well, in that first frame, there don't appear to be any credits. So the probability that this is the credits portion is very low. The second frame with the monkey, again, probability is really low, so no credits. But as we move down, okay, I can start to see what, based on my pattern matching, that there are credits appearing, so the probability goes high, so we can have a degree of confidence that that's the right moment. And so you can see around 58 minutes in, credits roll. And once you've developed that model, you can apply it to all of the content that you have. And also, you can amplify the audience experience, because without creating a whole bunch of additional overhead for your staff to be able to add that data in, you've been able to use some of these techniques to really deal with that very particular issue that was limiting you getting those double-digit engagement figures that you needed, but just spotting the fact that machine learning was one possible answer. And it's worth saying, machine learning is not going to be the answer to every single problem that we face. So really understanding when it is one of the things that we all need to become better educated at. So back to that slide about how do we define our approach to AI. What I've taken you through is really understanding at a high business level the fact that the conversation is always about efficiency, productivity, and creativity, but really I wanted you to really think about the three new A's: automate, augment, amplify. But there's something else. I think we need to redefine the I in AI, away from intelligence in a business context to these three things. We need to recognize immediate, invisible, and impact. AI is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's happening already. The impact is immediate. It's all around us. It's often invisible. A few of you have cameras out and you're either filming or taking pictures, or you're working on your laptops right now, checking your Facebook feeds. I can see you over there in the middle. If you're doing that, it's almost certain that you are interfacing with machine learning. I can almost guarantee it if you've got a modern smartphone. And increasingly, the deployment of machine learning-based AI is going to be invisible to all of us. It's just going to permeate society. The future is one where you can't opt out from AI. So we really need to understand the final I, which is impact. What is the impact of this? For business, for consumers, for audience members, for public, the upside, the potential is huge. But we do need to be careful that we don't squander that positive potential. Because every time we're making a judgment about when to apply, how to develop, what to do, what we're really doing is making a judgment about human capacity. Was it right for me to automate that process away from somebody who's doing that job? When I'm talking about augmenting somebody's role, is that the right, what judgment values am I making around that? And that can be positive and negative. It doesn't have to be dystopian or utopian. We're going to end up somewhere in the middle, but just recognize we're making human judgments about human capacity every time we are developing and deploying these services. So we're going to have to find a balance. Striking that balance is going to be really important between the utility and the effectiveness of machine learning and the rollout into society, into our businesses. If we don't, two things are going to happen. Another visual metaphor. We're going to alienate our staff base, all the people who work for us, the ones that we really value. Yesterday, there was lots of discussion about empowering our workforce. If we're not careful, we're going to alienate them. We're also going to alienate our customers, our audience members, and broader society if we get this wrong. Finding that balance is going to be really important. So business value, and we could stop the presentation here and just say, there you go, a little rule, some rules of thumb, 3 A's for AI, and remember what the I's mean. We could stop there, but business value can't be divorced from our values. Now, for the BBC, here's what we do. We inform, we educate, and entertain. That's our mission statement. That's what we do. But that's not how we do it. How we do it is really defined by our editorial guidelines. So things like trust and truth and accuracy, impartiality, being transparent, accountability, those are the BBC's editorial guidelines. Al Jazeera has very familiar ones. Lots of professional media. If it's not the exact same words, it's the same sentiments. And we might approach our businesses slightly different. We might have a slightly different editorial take. But these values, I think, are consistent and common across professional media. They define what's the difference between us and fringe, and people who are just playing in developing news and content and services. We set our high watermark for quality based around these values. But increasingly, these values are not just for our editorial colleagues, for our journalists and content makers. They apply to the whole organization, and we have to remind ourselves about that. So if you're an engineer, and that's my background, these values are just as important to the developments that I'm working on as they are to my journalistic colleagues. And if we don't follow these values, if we don't recognize that we already have developed and have a history of using these values in our businesses, what's the thing that's going to happen? We are likely to introduce machine learning into our operations with good intent because we think we are serving our audience need, we want to really help them. But often what happens is if you get your choices wrong, even with good intent, you can end up with bad outcomes. We've seen that across a range of industries. And what's the first thing that suffers? Well, trust. Trust by the consumer, the audience member, the member of the public in you and your brand and your company. And for media, that's a killer. Our whole business is based on people trusting who we are. The BBC is the most trusted brand, I would say, of course, globally for news. I'm sure my Al Jazeera colleagues would say the same about Al Jazeera, and quite rightly so, you should feel that way. Professional media, we all feel that trust is a cornerstone of who we are. So as we introduce machine learning, it's really important to recognize that trust is both at risk, but can also be verified if we are careful about the way and the approach that we take. But there's a trade-off, and there's a balance to be struck, and there's a relationship that we need to strike between trust and agency. And if you were to ask me, why is any of this AI discussion different from the big data discussion or some of the other technological discussions that happened? It's, well, over time, and if we follow the model that Eve was talking about, as we move towards more cognitive machine learning, more cognitive AI, we are going to increasingly be introducing agency into the algorithm, into the model, into the AI. We are going to be giving over some of that control. And because it's going to be permeating all aspects of our supply chains, all aspects of our life, it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to understand where is that control residing. So the first thing to recognize in developing these services is, are we comfortable with deploying that agency? And I think we should be optimistic about this and grip this and get ahead of this. This is definitely not about stifling or slowing down innovation. This is really about understanding what's at stake. The second thing we have to recognize, what's different about AI, is that if we're not careful, what we're actually doing is also taking agency away from our audience members, our customers, our consumers, and citizens. And that balance, that relationship they have with us could be weakened. But instead of that, what we need to do is consciously recognize our role should be giving a little bit of control back to our audience members. Now, the BBC has been really thinking about, okay, well, in a business context, we can really talk about what AI means for us just in our business, but the developments we're seeing are broader than just media, broader than just the BBC. They're happening across the whole of industry, and lots of sectors are going to be challenged and changed. And we identified, well, firstly, we said openly, and we put a paper out to UK government in a response to a call for evidence that the House of Lords had. We responded formally, and we said we see, on balance, that AI has massive positive potential. We are advocates. We do see AI permeating everything we do. But there's some challenges that are emerging that we can't hide behind. Firstly, the pervasive role of AI in mediating our digital lives. As I said, if you're on a smart device, almost certainly you're interacting with machine learning and AI. Secondly, the use of AI to influence behavior. In small, incremental ways, those nudging effects of recommendations and notifications coming up can have a nudging effect on the social norms that we have all developed. Now, social norms are not static, they change. What the UK was like at the beginning of the last century is not what the UK is like today. What is happening in the world 100 years ago, well, the world has moved on. Social norms evolve, and they're different across cultures, across geographies. They will evolve. But what we have to make sure we are consciously aware of is that the nudging effects of machine learning are not hidden and invisible from all of us, from the community of people who are going to be impacted. There will be displacement in the workforce. It's almost certain. If you look at reports by McKinsey, PwC, Deloitte, they've all projected within the next 5 to 10 years, significant automation of job roles. That's going to happen. Some new jobs will be created, some jobs will disappear. But that displacement is something that we have to navigate through. That transition is something we have to take the workforce through. And finally, one of the main things that we identified is, in all of this, back to that point I made near the beginning about the role of data, we're all working off and mining off and processing individual data. Let's recognize that's an individual's data. Let's give control back to the individual. That's what our position. We feel agency should be given back to the individual whose information we are using to do some of these amazing things that we're doing. So we committed to do 3 things as the BBC, but I'm hoping that Al Jazeera, other professional media, the vendors in the room, journalists and others can also commit to these things. They're not particular to the BBC. We can all do these. The first is inform the debate. Educate our colleagues, educate the masses. Journalism is already doing a fantastic job at covering this topic. You know, I was just Googling this last night. Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, Fox, NBCU, all of the major organizations cover this topic. Our job as practitioners is to make sure our colleagues are the best informed individuals to break this problem down, to explain it to the audiences, so they have control and understanding about how machine learning and AI is going to impact them. The second thing we can do, and in fact Al Jazeera already doing it, is we can convene the debate. This forum, and why I feel so humbled to be here, is one of the examples of where we need to bring groups together so they can really consider what this means for media and our role in it. And the final thing, we need to really think about how we develop responsible AI services. So those 3 examples I gave you, in each of those, we are also asking, well, what's happening to editorial control in this? How do we're working with our editorial teams very closely on those 3 examples I gave you to understand how to balance the introduction of machine learning and AI into the BBC itself. How do we make our algorithms transparent and accountable? That quote, the one that I didn't attribute at the beginning, the one that a few of you said we should keep the person out of the room, and a few of you were completely undecided, that was from Sundar Pichai, the Google CEO. Now, if you follow Sundar, he's not prone to hyperbole. He's quite a reflective individual. If that's what he feels, even if he's a fraction of the way to being right, we have to give this the seriousness that it deserves. And I'll close by this. We have to remember that as media, we are gatekeepers to people's understanding of the world around them. And not only does that apply to our output and the way we explain the stories, but it applies to us as organizations and how we engineer ourselves. So if we're going to really take advantage of machine learning and AI, we have to really give it the consideration that our editorial experience has already imbued in us. We have all of the skills that we need. We just have to make sure that we tap into those. Thank you very much.